I don't think I did anything wrong. I just didn't tell him everything. It wasn't lying. It was protecting the moment. Now he knows, and there's a lawyer's card on the counter where his coffee cup used to be. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Mariel Daven, and I don't think I did anything wrong. I just didn't tell him everything. People love to say lies destroy marriages, but they never talk about how the truth can too. I only wanted peace in my house, not another argument about the past. It wasn't like I cheated after we were married. What happened before I conceived our daughter didn't need to become some courtroom topic. I told myself I was protecting the family, keeping things calm. Ethan always overanalyzed everything, and I thought silence would save us both from his logic. For 5 years, it worked. He trusted me. He believed every word I didn't say. Then last week, he found something. An old photo, a date that didn't fit, maybe a message I forgot to delete. He didn't yell or cry or accuse me. He just looked at me like a stranger and said he'd call his lawyer. Now the house feels like a waiting room. His mug is gone from the counter, the bed perfectly smooth on his side, and the sound of the printer keeps me awake at night. Everyone thinks he's the victim. I still think I was just misunderstood. When Ethan and I first met, I thought he was the calm I had always needed. He was steady, polite, almost quiet to the point of mystery. The kind of man who made you feel like the world could fall apart outside, and he would still fold his laundry properly. I used to admire that. It made me feel safe. Maybe that's the problem with safety. It starts to feel like a cage once you've lived in it long enough. Back then, before Naomi was even a thought, I worked at an architecture firm downtown. It was hectic and full of those half flirtations people pretend not to notice. That's where Tomas came in. He wasn't special, not really. Just one of those men who knew how to make a woman feel like she was glowing. He'd drop by my desk with coffee, say something small that sounded big, like how I made plans feel possible. I never planned for anything to happen. It just did, in that fuzzy space between late nights and compliments that sound too warm. It was months before Ethan and I decided to start trying for a baby. Tomas was long gone by then, or at least that's what I told myself when the timing started to blur. I've always believed that what matters most is the life you build, not the details of how you got there. Ethan and I built something good. A small house in the suburbs, steady income, routines that worked. He made dinner twice a week. I handled weekends. We had movie nights, inside jokes, everything that looks perfect from the outside. When Naomi was born, he cried harder than I did. He held her like something fragile and irreplaceable, and for a moment, I thought I'd never need to hide anything again. But secrets don't vanish. They wait. It started small. He found an old group photo from my office party. Tomas's arm was around my waist, our smiles too familiar. I laughed, said it was nothing, said he was imagining things. Ethan smiled too, but not the same way. That night, he stayed up later than usual. I woke around midnight to the faint hum of the printer in the hallway. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was finishing paperwork. I believed him because I wanted to. The next morning, his mug was clean and back on its side of the counter, mine still half full. I told myself marriage changes people. That quiet distance wasn't punishment, it was maturity. We were growing up, becoming serious parents. If he needed space, I'd give it to him. I didn't notice how deliberate everything became. His emails scheduled at precise times, his notes tucked into labeled folders. There was even a new reminder on his phone one morning. Downtown, 3:20 p.m. I asked what it was for, and he said, "Just an errand." When I mentioned it to my mother, she said men who spend too much time in silence are hiding something. I laughed because she always says that about every man. She told me not to overthink, that a husband should be grateful his wife keeps her past private. "You have a child now," she said. Don't dig up old ghosts just to feed his doubts. That sounded right to me. I told myself honesty would only cause pain. And love means protecting people from pain, doesn't it? Then, one evening, as I was bathing Naomi, he came into the bathroom and stood quietly in the doorway. He watched the bubbles for a long time, then said, "She looks more like you every day." I said, "Of course she does," laughing a little too fast. He nodded, slow and careful. "Yes," he said, "she does." Then he walked away. I hated that calm. It wasn't anger. It was judgment without words. I wanted him to yell, to accuse, to fight me. Instead, he went back to his desk, opened his laptop, and typed something for nearly an hour while I sat on the couch pretending to scroll through my phone. When he finished, he printed a page, looked at it, then fed it into the shredder. The next day, he kissed Naomi on the forehead before leaving for work, but didn't look at me. I told myself he was stressed. I even sent him a photo later of Naomi playing in her new pink pajamas, captioned "Daddy's twin." He didn't reply. At work, I couldn't focus. Every time I looked at the office window, I thought about Tomas, how quickly he'd disappeared from my life, how I'd managed to erase almost every trace except a few digital fragments I'd forgotten about. That's all it takes. One forgotten message, one photo buried in the wrong folder. I deleted everything I could find that day, just in case. That night, Ethan came home early. He hung his jacket on the chair, not the hook by the door. He poured coffee, even though it was almost 9. I tried to joke, said he was developing nocturnal habits. He smiled faintly and said he worked better when it was quiet. I told him the quiet was starting to feel lonely. He said, "Then make some noise." His tone wasn't cruel, just flat. We ate dinner in near silence. Naomi babbled between us, tapping her spoon against the tray. I said something about repainting the nursery, and he said, "We might not need to." When I asked why, he shrugged. "She's outgrowing it. Kids change fast." Later, while washing dishes, I saw him write something on a sticky note and tuck it into the drawer beside the sink. I pretended not to notice, but the label on the note stuck in my mind. "Bring forms." I called Karina that night. She said men always act strange when they feel threatened. "He's probably worried you're too independent," she told me. "Don't feed his paranoia. The best defense is confidence." I liked that answer. Confidence sounded cleaner than guilt. So the next morning, I made an effort. I dressed up, made pancakes, played cheerful music while he got ready for work. I even kissed him on the cheek as he reached for his keys. He froze for a second, then nodded and said, "I have a meeting downtown. Don't wait up." When he left, I looked around the kitchen. Everything was too neat. His half of the counter gleamed like a display. No crumbs, no mug, nothing personal. I poured myself another cup of coffee and noticed the faint smell of toner again, that sharp paper scent. Somewhere behind me, the printer light blinked once, even though it wasn't on. That weekend, we went to my mother's for lunch. She asked why Ethan seemed so distant. I said he was tired. He answered politely, but didn't stay long. When he left early, my mother said, "Men like him don't explode. They evaporate." I laughed, pretending not to understand. Sunday night, he didn't come to bed until after midnight. When I woke in the dark, I saw his phone screen light up. For a moment, I thought it was a message from me, but the notification read, "File uploaded successfully." Then the glow disappeared. The next morning, I asked if something was wrong. He said, "Nothing we can't fix." That should have comforted me, but the way he said it made my skin crawl. I started telling myself stories, how every marriage has secrets, how mine were small compared to what other people did. I didn't sleep much. Sometimes I'd get up at night and stand by the nursery door just to listen to Naomi breathe. That sound made everything else seem less serious, like no matter what he suspected, we still had this family, this proof of love. On Tuesday, he came home with a new folder tucked under his arm. He said it was work stuff, but I noticed the corner label, household. He never labeled anything before. He placed it in the desk drawer and locked it. I asked since when we locked drawers. He said, since trust became complicated. I told him that was poetic for someone who hated poetry. He smiled faintly and said, patience makes poets of us all. That night, he moved a few of his files into the guest room. He said the light was better there. I asked if he was planning to stay there. He said it was just temporary. The next morning, Naomi asked why Daddy slept in the other room. I said he was working hard. Ethan stood behind me, watching. He didn't correct me. I still believed I could talk my way out of whatever he was building in his head. I'd done it before, smiled, softened, reminded him of our history. But this time, there was a wall I couldn't see through. A wall built from receipts, photos, quiet actions. On Thursday, when I walked into the kitchen, there was a fresh stack of papers on the counter. Just blank pages, or maybe I hoped they were. His mug was gone. The sound of the front door closing was soft, final, like a file saving itself. I stood there, half awake, half scared, telling myself I still hadn't done anything wrong. I'd only chosen silence over chaos. I was protecting my family. At least, that's what I keep saying. The next week started quietly. Too quietly. Ethan moved around the house like someone following a schedule no one else could see. He didn't slam doors or start fights. He just seemed to be operating on some private rhythm that didn't include me. Every morning, I'd find his coffee cup rinsed and turned upside down beside the sink, perfectly aligned with the edge of the counter. Mine sat next to it, half empty, the ring of cold coffee drying into the shape of a question I couldn't answer. He'd started taking Naomi to daycare again, even though it used to be my thing. He said it was easier for him since his office was closer. I didn't argue. The truth was, I needed the extra half hour alone to breathe. The silence of the house was heavy but familiar. I told myself everything would even out if I just stayed calm and didn't push him. People always said marriages went through seasons. This was just a cold one. That Friday, we were supposed to meet friends for dinner, something I almost cancelled but didn't want to explain why. Karina insisted I come. You can't let him control the energy, she said over the phone. If you act nervous, he'll think he's right about whatever he's imagining. When we got to the restaurant, Ethan was polite but detached. He ordered his food, smiled when spoken to, and even offered to pour wine for everyone. But the air between us was stretched thin. Every time someone mentioned kids, I caught his eyes flicking toward Naomi's photo on my phone case. The group was relaxed, the table loud with laughter. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could steer the mood back to normal. So when Karina made a joke about how hard it was to balance motherhood and work, I jumped in too quickly. I said something like, "At least she knows who the father is, right?" Everyone laughed. It was supposed to be harmless. A jab at myself, a way to show I didn't take gossip seriously. But Ethan's smile froze halfway. The laugh lines around his mouth didn't move. He just stared at me for a long moment, then lifted his glass and said softly, "That's an odd thing to joke about." The whole table went still for a second. I laughed again, louder than necessary. "Relax," I said, waving my hand. "It's called humor. Maybe you should try it sometime." Karina gave me a look that said too far, but I ignored her. I was tired of tiptoeing. I wanted him to react, to say something, anything that would prove he still cared enough to be angry. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, folded his napkin, and said, "I'm glad you find it funny." Then he went back to eating like nothing had happened. When I posted a short clip from that dinner later, a cheerful video of everyone laughing, I captioned it, "Love means surviving each other's jokes." It was meant to make the night look light-hearted. By morning, it had a few hundred likes, mostly from friends who didn't know the context. But the comments weren't all friendly. Someone wrote, "Weird thing to joke about, though." Another, "Does your husband know you're still talking to your old co-worker?" I deleted those comments, but the damage was done. Ethan had seen the post. He didn't mention it, but when I came into the kitchen that morning, he was scrolling on his phone. He turned the screen face down as I walked in. I poured coffee and tried to sound casual. "You saw the post, right? Everyone knows I was joking." He said, "Everyone?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a laugh. "Karina told me even her sister thought it was funny." He nodded slowly. "I'm sure she did." Then he picked up his keys and left. That was the moment I started to feel the floor shifting. His silence wasn't cold anymore. It was organized, purposeful. When I went upstairs to get ready for work, I noticed he'd cleaned out one of the drawers in the guest room. The space where his tools used to be now held neat stacks of papers and a black folder labeled in his careful handwriting, Household Archive. I didn't touch it, but I stared at it long enough to memorize the label. At work, Karina sent me a message asking if Ethan was still doing the robot routine. I told her he'd get over it. She replied with a voice note that said, "You need to remind him who's in charge. Men like that only respect confidence." That night, I took her advice. I waited until after Naomi's bedtime, then opened a bottle of wine and turned on the TV. When Ethan walked in, I smiled and patted the couch. "Movie night?" I asked, pretending nothing was wrong. He hesitated, then sat down beside me but didn't touch the glass I'd poured for him. We watched in silence for 20 minutes before I turned to him and said, "You're being weird. If you're angry, just say it." He didn't look away from the screen. "I'm not angry." "Then what are you?" "Careful," he said. I laughed, but it came out sharp. "Careful about what? Your wife making jokes? Or your wife, period?" He finally looked at me then. His eyes were steady, almost gentle. "Careful about saying things you can't take back." I told him he was being dramatic, that he should learn to laugh at himself like normal people. He stood up, took his untouched glass, and rinsed it in the sink. "I'll be downtown in the morning," he said. "Try not to post anything until then." It was the first time he'd ever commented on my posting habits. I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't let him see. "Maybe I'll post about my perfect marriage," I said, trying to sting him back. He only nodded. "Do that." When I woke the next morning, Naomi's laughter filled the house. She was playing with him in the living room, building towers out of blocks. The scene looked perfect, almost staged. He smiled at her, then at me. "We're going to the park before I head out," he said. I told him I'd join, but he shook his head. "You said you needed rest." After they left, I noticed the faint smell of printer toner again, stronger this time. In the guest room, a corner of white paper peeked from under the locked drawer. I pulled at it, but it was just a blank sheet. When they came back that afternoon, Ethan's mood was unreadable. He played with Naomi for a while, then went upstairs. I followed him, trying to sound light. "You know," I said, "people think we're couple goals online." He turned slightly. "That must be nice for them." I rolled my eyes. "You can't keep punishing me for a joke." He paused at the doorway. "Who said it was punishment?" The question hung there, heavy as lead. That evening, Karina came over with takeout. She said everyone at the restaurant was still talking about my wild joke. Apparently, someone had tagged me in a clip from another angle. You could see Ethan's face when I said it, the exact moment his smile broke. I tried to laugh it off again, but she hesitated. "Maybe delete it," she said, "before it gets worse." I told her deleting it would make me look guilty. She shrugged and said, "Then enjoy the attention." When Ethan came downstairs later, he greeted Karina politely, kissed Naomi on the head, and went to his desk. The sound of typing filled the background like rain. Karina leaned closer and whispered, "He's so quiet, it's creepy." I told her he'd been like that lately. Before she left, she hugged me and said, "You need to flip the narrative. Post something sweet. A photo of you three at home, something to make people root for you." I did. That night, I uploaded a family photo from Naomi's birthday last year. Me smiling, Ethan holding Naomi mid-laugh. I captioned it, "Always us, no matter what people think." By morning, the photo had hundreds of comments again, half supportive, half mocking. Someone wrote, "If that's always you, where's Tomas?" The name hit me like a punch. I hadn't heard it out loud in months. I deleted the comment, blocked the account, and told myself it was just some troll. Still, when I went downstairs, Ethan was standing by the counter scrolling through his phone again. I asked if he'd seen the photo. He said, "Yes, you look happy in old pictures." I said, "You could at least try to act like we're fine." He looked up then, voice quiet. "Are we?" I didn't answer. He walked to the sink, rinsed his mug again, and said, "You might want to stop posting. Words have a way of coming back." I wanted to scream at him, to demand he tell me what he was planning, but something about his calm froze me. Instead, I followed him to the hallway and said, "If you think I've done something wrong, say it." He turned halfway. "You'll say it for me eventually." That night, he slept in the guest room again. I stayed up scrolling, deleting comments, reading every line that mentioned Tomas until my eyes burned. At one point, I thought I heard the faint click of a lock from upstairs. Then a door opened, and his footsteps crossed the hall. When I looked at my phone again, the post was gone. Deleted, not by me. The next morning, I found his phone lying on the counter, beside a yellow sticky note that read only, "Meeting personal, 10:40 a.m. He came in quietly, kissed Naomi, and said, "I'll be home late." I smiled tightly and said, "Take your time." As the door closed behind him, I realized something I didn't want to admit out loud. Whatever game I thought I was playing, I wasn't the one keeping score anymore. By the next week, I'd stopped pretending I didn't feel the distance. Ethan's silence was no longer background noise. It had weight. It filled the corners of every room, pressed against the walls, made the house feel smaller. Even Naomi noticed. One morning, while she was coloring at the table, she asked why Daddy didn't laugh anymore. I told her he was tired from work, but even she looked doubtful, her tiny head tilting the same way he used to when he didn't believe me. I tried to fix it the only way I knew how, by curating our lives into something that looked normal. I cleaned, cooked, smiled for photos I didn't post. I thought if I could make the surface perfect again, the cracks would stop showing. But perfection only made his quiet sharper. He wasn't angry. He was organized. Every move felt deliberate, like he'd already mapped out how this would end, and I was just catching up. On Tuesday, I stopped by Naomi's daycare to drop off a blanket she'd forgotten. One of the mothers, a woman named Celine, smiled a little too tightly and said she'd seen my posts. "You're brave," she said, her tone meaning the opposite. I forced a laugh and asked what she meant. She said something like, "Not many women could joke about timing that way." Then she excused herself. I went back to my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a while staring at my reflection in the windshield. I told myself it didn't matter what people thought, but it did. By the time I got home, my stomach was tight with anger, not at Ethan, but at the world for choosing sides in a story I hadn't even told. That night, I asked him directly if he'd said anything to anyone. He didn't even look up from his laptop. "About what?" he asked. "About me," I said. He typed something, pressed enter, and said, "People talk. You gave them something to say." I wanted to throw his laptop across the room. Instead, I said, "You could defend me." He said, "You can defend yourself. You're better at that than anyone I know." His tone wasn't cruel, just factual, and that made it worse. I said he was twisting things, making it seem like I was the villain. He replied, "I don't have to twist anything." Then he got up and left the room. Later, when I went upstairs, I noticed the light from the guest room spilling under the door. I pushed it open just enough to see him sitting at the desk, scanning documents into his laptop. The printer hummed once, spitting out another sheet, blank again. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Cleaning up." The next morning, his schedule was already written neatly on the fridge whiteboard. Grocery list, errands, and one odd line that read, "Storage pickup, 7:45 a.m. I pointed at it. "What's this about?" he said. "Just old files." Something about his calm made me feel cornered. I told him we needed to talk, that the rumors were starting to spread. He didn't answer. He took Naomi's backpack, kissed her forehead, and said he'd drop her off. I watched from the window as his car pulled out, always facing the street now instead of the driveway. It felt like he was ready to leave at any second. At work, I could feel the whispers. People stopped talking when I walked into the break room. My phone buzzed with screenshots, posts, messages, comments linking my name to Tomas's. Someone had dug up an old photo of us at the firm's holiday party years ago. He was standing behind me, his hand on my shoulder. The caption someone added said, "Timing really is everything." Karina messaged me right away. "Don't freak out," she wrote, which of course made me do exactly that. She said someone had seen Tomas's account posting a story last night, something vague about the one that got away. It wasn't tagged, but everyone assumed. I left work early, pretending to feel sick. On the drive home, I kept rehearsing excuses in my head. When I got there, Ethan's car was already in the driveway, engine cold. He was home early too. The house was too quiet again. On the kitchen counter sat his mug, clean as always, beside a single folded piece of paper. My heart jumped before I realized it was just a receipt from the hardware store. He'd bought storage boxes. When he came downstairs, he was on the phone. His voice was calm, polite. "Yes, I've got the records," he said. "I'll bring them by tomorrow morning." He hung up before he saw me listening. I asked who it was. He said, "Work." That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt magnified. The hum of the fridge, the ticking clock, the soft rustle of papers from the guest room. Around midnight, I went downstairs for water and saw his laptop open on the desk. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. A spreadsheet filled the screen. It had columns labeled dates, events, messages, and notes. I scrolled without meaning to. The entries were short, clipped, dinner, photo posted, club night, comment thread deleted, appointment 9:25 a.m., downtown. My chest tightened. I closed the laptop and backed away before he caught me. When I returned to bed, he wasn't there. He slept in the guest room again, door locked. By morning, I was half delirious from lack of sleep. I decided to fight back the only way I knew how, by controlling the narrative. If the internet wanted a show, I'd give them one. I took Naomi to the park, posted a picture of us laughing with the caption, "My world in one photo. Everything else is noise." Within an hour, it had hundreds of reactions. Most were supportive, the usual empty hearts and emojis. But one comment stood out. Funny how the timeline doesn't add up. It was from an anonymous account. No photo, no name. Still, I knew. Tomas. When Ethan came home, I was sitting on the couch scrolling through the comments, my phone trembling in my hand. He took one look at me and said, "You should turn that off." "I'm not hiding," I said. He answered, "You already did." The rest of the evening passed in silence. Naomi played with her dolls, while I sat at the table pretending to read. Ethan cooked dinner for her, not for me. After she went to bed, I finally said, "You think she's not yours, don't you?" He didn't respond right away. He just looked at the empty chair across from him and said, "I think truth has a strange way of finding air." I laughed, but it came out shaky. "You're talking like a lawyer now." He nodded slightly. "Maybe that's what it takes." When I asked what that meant, he said nothing, just rinsed his cup and left it upside down on the counter again. 2 days later, I picked up Naomi from daycare. The teacher avoided eye contact, smiling too brightly. On the bulletin board by the door, someone had pinned a printout of my park post, probably by mistake, maybe not. The caption was circled in red pen. I wanted to tear it down, but other parents were watching. At home, I confronted Ethan again. "This is getting out of hand," I said. "People are turning this into something ugly." He looked up from his desk. Maybe it always was. You can't just stand there and let them think. He cut me off, voice calm. I'm not standing. I'm preparing. It was the first time he'd said anything that sounded like a threat, though it wasn't one in his tone. It was worse than a threat. It was a promise. That night, I noticed the smell of toner again, faint but constant. His laptop light glowed through the crack of the door. When I leaned closer, I heard the soft whir of the printer, then the shredder. I wanted to storm in, to demand he stop whatever this was, but I didn't. Something in me still believed that silence could undo silence. Instead, I went to Naomi's room, sat beside her bed, and traced her hair off her forehead. She slept so deeply, so easily, like nothing in the world could touch her. I whispered that everything would be okay, that families fix themselves if they try hard enough. But my voice trembled on the word families. When I returned to the hallway, Ethan was standing at the other end, watching me. He said nothing, just nodded once, almost politely, before closing the guest room door again. The next morning, his alarm went off early. He left before sunrise, car headlights sweeping across the walls as he backed out. I stood by the window watching him drive away, feeling the quiet collapse behind him. On the counter, where his mug used to be, was a single USB stick. It was labeled with a date, just last week's. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, and wondered what version of me it contained. For the first time, I realized he wasn't gathering evidence to understand me. He was gathering it to leave me, and he wasn't going to shout or accuse or even explain. He was going to prove it, lawfully, in daylight. And somehow, knowing that made me angrier than any argument ever had. By the time Sunday came, I couldn't stand the quiet anymore. The house felt staged, too clean, too ordered, like someone preparing to hand over keys. Every drawer in the kitchen had been reorganized. Receipts that used to be crumpled in his pockets were now clipped and stacked in a folder marked expenses. Even his shoes by the door were lined up perfectly, soles touching the wall. I told myself this was just his way of coping, that some men clean when they're upset. But the truth sat in my chest like a rock. He wasn't coping. He was recording. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy, so I called Karina. She suggested we meet for coffee downtown. You need to talk to someone who isn't quietly judging you, she said. Let him drown in his own seriousness. The cafe was busy and bright, the kind of place that makes you feel visible again. I wore a white blouse and lipstick I hadn't used since before Naomi was born. Karina whistled when she saw me and said, "Now that's the girl who gets attention." It felt good for a moment, to feel like I was still someone with a pulse. We ordered lattes and sat by the window. I told her everything, the spreadsheets, the folders, the USB, the way he watched me like a case study. I said he was punishing me without saying a word. Karina leaned back, crossed her arms and said, "You need to get ahead of this. Tell your side before he tells his." "I don't have a side," I said, trying to sound calm. "It was just a mistake. The timing overlapped a little, that's all. It doesn't mean anything." She raised an eyebrow. "It means something to him, and to everyone else if he's talking." "He's not talking," I said. "That's the problem. He's planning." Karina nodded slowly, stirring her coffee. "Then make him look unreasonable. Say he's paranoid. Say he's trying to rewrite your life because he can't handle not being in control." I didn't realize how loud we'd gotten until I noticed the two women at the next table glance over. One of them had her phone out, angled slightly our way. I thought she was scrolling, but something in her posture made me uneasy. I lowered my voice. "You think he'd really take it that far?" Karina shrugged. "You said he's been recording things. If he wanted to humiliate you, he'd start quietly, collecting, documenting, waiting for the right time." She took a sip of her coffee, eyes sharp. "You should document too, just in case." The word document made me flinch. I hated how it sounded, like something cold and official. "I'm not in trouble," I said. "I'm just misunderstood." Karina laughed softly. That's what every misunderstood person says right before someone else tells their story better. When we left the cafe, I saw a familiar face through the window, one of Ethan's co-workers, Michael, sitting near the back. He was pretending to look at his laptop, but his eyes flicked up when I passed. My stomach dropped. He'd heard. That evening, when I got home, Ethan was in the living room. Naomi was coloring quietly beside him. The sight looked peaceful until I realized he wasn't reading or watching TV. He was holding his phone, earphones in, eyes fixed on the screen. I asked if he'd eaten. He said he wasn't hungry. I told him I'd met Karina. His hand stilled for a moment, but he didn't look up. "I know," he said. "You know? There's already a clip online. You should check before you deny it." I grabbed my phone, heart racing. On a local gossip page, someone had uploaded a short video from the cafe. My voice was clear, the words cutting through the background noise. The timing overlapped a little, that's all. The caption read, "Wife caught admitting affair. Friend encourages cover-up." I felt the air leave my lungs. "It's taken out of context," I said quickly. "You know how people twist things." He paused the video, finally looked at me. "I didn't twist anything." "Ethan, it's nothing. You're really going to let strangers decide what's real?" He set his phone down and spoke so quietly I almost missed it. "You already let them decide." I wanted to scream, to throw something, but Naomi was watching. Instead, I turned to her and said it was bedtime. She hugged me without a word. Ethan watched us walk upstairs, expression unreadable. When I came back down, he was standing by the window, arms crossed. "You know what the worst part is?" he said. "You thought I wouldn't find out. Not about him, not about the timing, not about how long you were going to let me believe a story that wasn't true." I said, "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything." "That's a nice way to put it," he said. "Maybe your lawyer will like it too." The word lawyer hit me like a slap. "You're exaggerating. You can't just—" He interrupted, calm as ever. "You'll get something soon. It won't be a surprise." He walked past me and went upstairs without another word. I stood there, frozen, my pulse thudding in my throat. I wanted to chase him, to fix it, but I didn't know what to say anymore. Every version of the truth sounded like manipulation when he looked at me like that. Later that night, I crept into the guest room. The drawer that used to be locked was open, empty now except for a small stack of envelopes. I lifted one, blank inside. He was playing with me, showing what he could do. I sat at his desk, staring at the clean indentation where his laptop had been. The faint scent of toner still hung in the air. I whispered to myself that it would all blow over, that we were still a family, that he wouldn't actually go through with it. But the silence around me didn't agree. The next morning, Naomi asked if Daddy was coming to the park with us. I said yes, even though I knew he wouldn't. When I looked out the window, his car was already gone. The only thing left on the counter was another sticky note, this one neatly written in his small handwriting. Downtown 11:15. I stared at it for a long time, not knowing whether it meant another meeting or the end of everything. The following days felt like walking through a house made of glass. Every sound echoed. Every word felt dangerous. Ethan didn't raise his voice or slam doors. He simply moved through space like someone who had already packed in his mind. He started getting up before dawn, his alarm silent, the soft shuffle of clothes replacing the usual buzz. By the time Naomi and I came downstairs, his car was gone, and his side of the table looked untouched, just a single clean mug and a folded napkin left behind, like proof of absence. My mother called that week. Of course she'd seen the video. Everyone had. She asked if it was real. I told her people were spreading rumors. She said, "Rumors start where truth gets bored." Then, after a pause, she added, "If he's talking to a lawyer, you'd better find one too." I told her that wasn't necessary, that Ethan wasn't that type of man. She laughed bitterly. Every man is that type when he feels humiliated. He just hides it better than the loud ones. That night, I sat on the couch scrolling through old photos of us. Trips, birthdays, Naomi's first day of preschool. We'd been so ordinary, safe, predictable. I wondered when that had stopped being enough for me. Somewhere between Thomas's attention and Ethan's patience, I'd convinced myself I deserved more. Now, the silence I once admired had turned into a wall I couldn't climb. When Ethan came home, I asked if we could talk. He hesitated at the doorway, holding his jacket like a shield. I said, "You can't keep treating me like I'm on trial." He set the jacket down, calm as ever. "This isn't a trial," he said. "Trials come after evidence." I told him I didn't understand. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You do." After he went upstairs, I noticed a small padded envelope on the counter. It had no label, no handwriting, just the faint impression of something inside. I opened it, expecting another one of his silent messages. It was empty. Completely empty. The point wasn't the contents. It was the warning. He was showing me what he could take away. The next morning, Naomi spilled cereal all over the floor and started crying. I knelt down, cleaned it up, and told her everything was fine. Ethan came in quietly, crouched beside her, and said, "It's okay, sweetheart. Things break sometimes." His voice was soft but deliberate. When I looked at him, he didn't look at me back. At work, I tried to focus, but people whispered. Someone had leaked more screenshots, old texts between Tomas and me. They weren't explicit, but the timestamps were enough to suggest what I'd always tried to deny. My supervisor called me into his office. He said maybe it was best to take some time off until things settled. When I came home early, Ethan was already there. His laptop was open on the kitchen counter, and for the first time, he didn't close it when I walked in. On the screen was a clean file tree, Archive A, Archive B. My name was on one of them. I stood there frozen. He didn't look up. "Transparency," he said, "is easier when there's a record." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just whispered, "What are you doing to me?" He closed the laptop gently. "Nothing you didn't already start." The next few days blurred together. My mother called again to say that his family knew, that his sister had stopped answering her messages. Even Karina had gone quiet, probably too embarrassed to be associated with me now that the cafe clip had spread beyond our town. The few friends who messaged me used words like mistake and regret, as if that made anything better. I started avoiding the mirror. Every time I caught my reflection, I looked like someone else, someone cornered, stripped of control. At night, I'd hear the faint scratch of paper from the guest room, sometimes a soft mechanical click, like a camera shutter. I imagined him cataloging, sorting, building a case no one could argue against. On Thursday, Naomi asked if Daddy would be at her school performance. I said yes, even though I hadn't seen his name on the sign-up list. When the day came, he did show up, standing at the back, polite, distant, recording the show on his phone like every other parent. When it ended, Naomi ran into his arms. He smiled for her, then nodded at me, a small, unreadable gesture before walking out. That night he came home late. His steps were measured, slow. I was waiting at the table. "You're punishing me," I said. "You want everyone to think I'm some monster." He set down his keys and said, "I don't want anyone to think anything. I just want what's true to be clear." "What's true?" I snapped. "That I made one mistake, that I didn't tell you every detail. You're acting like I destroyed your life." He met my eyes then, calm and steady. "You didn't destroy it," he said. "You just rewrote it without telling me." I felt something break in my chest. "Ethan, we have a child. You can't erase that." His voice was quiet. "I'm not erasing her." The next morning, he dressed in a suit I hadn't seen in years. He looked sharp, deliberate, like he was heading somewhere important. I asked where he was going. He said, "To handle it properly." I followed him to the door. "What does that mean?" He paused, his hand on the knob. "You'll know when it arrives." When he left, the air in the house felt thinner, like the walls had exhaled. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, staring at the empty envelope he'd left days ago. The clock ticked louder than usual. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with its usual life, cars passing, children playing, but inside, everything felt suspended. By evening, I tried to convince myself he was bluffing. Ethan wasn't the type to humiliate anyone publicly. He'd always believed in dignity, in logic. But maybe that's what made him so dangerous now. He could ruin me without raising his voice. Naomi climbed into my lap, holding one of her drawings. "It's all of us," she said proudly. I looked down at the paper. There were 3 stick figures, me, her, and Ethan, but a faint smudge of eraser marks between us where she'd changed something. I asked what it was. She shrugged. Daddy said sometimes families look different later. The next morning, his car was gone again, the driveway empty except for a thin tire track leading toward the main road. On the counter sat his mug, spotless as always, beside a new envelope sealed this time, my name printed on it in his careful handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee first, pretending I could still control the pace of the day. But my hands were shaking as I peeled the flap open. Inside was a single note, short and clean. "Mariel, please be home at 3. Someone will be by with documents. It's time we made this clear." I sat there for a long time, reading it over and over, as if another version of the sentence might appear. There were no threats, no accusations, just precision. That was what frightened me most. Ethan wasn't angry anymore. He was certain. I looked around our kitchen, at the neat counters, the stacked dishes, the soft pink drawing still on the fridge. Everything looked too still, as if it already belonged to someone else. The knock came exactly at 3. A man in a grey suit asked for me by name and handed over a thick envelope stamped with the court seal. Inside were papers, petition for paternity and custody clarification. Through the window, Ethan stood by his car, calm, unreadable. I opened my mouth to call out, but nothing came. The sound of the door closing was final.